Chapter 29, The Voice. Ombrick had been furiously preparing for his trip to the Earth's core. From the moment he'd figured out what had happened to his library and Mr. Corty's role in its disappearance, he'd worked nonstop to make a perfect reproduction of it. Every single book, every single history, calculation, chart, map, mixture, blueprint, plan, and spell had been duplicated and set down. The entire village had been busy binding the texts that Ombrick had dictated to the owls, who were brilliantly adept at writing and drawing with both talons at the same time. It was fortunate that Ombrick could call upon his unmatched memory to recite the entire trove of his knowledge. When the last volume was stitched and bound, Ombrick stood back to take in the whole of it. It looked as if his library had never been touched. It looked perfect, but it was all bogus. There were flaws and carefully crafted into each bit of information. Because of Ombrick's perfect memory, he knew exactly where to make a change here, a switch there. If followed to the letter, not one spell in this entire fabrication would work. Flaws carefully crafted into each bit of information. Ombrick had no idea what form the real library was in, since Mr. Corty had bravely devoured it. The wizard was impressed by this brilliant bit of strategy on Mr. Corty's and Nightlight's part, but he had to make certain that Pitch did not get the real library. The phony one would have to be used to trick the villain. This had been an extremely exhausting task, and he still had to muster the energy to astrally project himself in the immense library all the way to the center of the earth. He sat in his favorite chair thinking about his store of knowledge. Remembering it had been both satisfying and bittersweet. He felt as though he had relived the entire arc of his life. He remembered learning each and every bit of magic, where he'd been, who he'd been with at the time. He realized that he'd achieved a rich, wild, vivid life. He had lived as he had believed. He had seen and known more wonder than almost any mortal ever had. So he felt a weary satisfaction. He would just need to rest his mind for a while. Ombrick leaned back and tugged at his beard, the owls watching him worriedly. They had never seen their master so tired, so frail. Ombrick's breathing became quiet, rhythmic, and he drifted into a deep sleep. He dreamed of when he was just a child in the city of Atlantis. There had been a day in his childhood that had always baffled him, the day of his first magic, and now he seemed to be reliving it. He hadn't been much younger than the youngest William and had been secretly listening to the lessons of the older children. He had heard knowledge he was not yet supposed to know. He learned the secret of how to make a daydream come true. The young Ombrick stood in an open field and started to recite the spell. It was a difficult enchantment and required great concentration, but he was a boy with a talent for concentration. He focused hard till his mind was clear of all distraction. He chanted the words slowly and thoughtfully. Ombrick had always daydreamed of flying, and after a time he started drifting upward. At first, just grazing the top of the tall green field grass, then higher, and finally up into the sky. He flew in and around clouds, soaring and spiraling like a fantastic sort of bird. But he had gone too fast and flown too high. His young mind grew tired. He could no longer maintain the spell. He began to fall. Fear took over his thinking as he plummeted to the ground. He knew he must stop being afraid and focus on the spell, but his pulse was pounding and panic set in. He began to tumble uncontrollably, spiraling end over end with sickening speed. Everything was a terrifying blur. He fell so fast that he began to black out, and he was glad He couldn't stand to feel a terror this total. He didn't want to face the instant that was coming, the moment when he was smashed to the ground and be no more. As he began to lose consciousness, he felt a strange sort of calm and all acceptance of what would happen, and acceptance of what would happen. Then he heard a voice whisper to him, I believe, I believe, I believe. It was a pleasant voice, one he did not recognize, but at the same time it sounded familiar, and he no longer felt afraid. Then, as all went black, he knew everything would be all right. And it was. He opened his young eyes some time later. He was in the same green field. He was not hurt. Not a scratch or a bruise was on him. Only his red hair was tousled. Ombrick never knew how he had survived or who had spoken the magic words to him. But on that day, he had learned the power of fear, that fear was an enemy that must always be conquered. Then the memory ended, but the dream went on. Ombrick now saw himself in that same field from childhood. He was not a boy anymore, but very old. He lay in the soft green grass. It was so cool and comfortable. There was a soothing breeze, and the sky above was alive with white clouds that drifted by like great galleons. I am so tired. Maybe I will just stay here forever, he thought. It is peaceful. But now he heard the words again, echoing from far away, but this time the voice was different. It was a young girl's voice. He struggled to sit up, and as he did, he saw Katherine standing near him. Then North appeared next to her. They beckoned him to join. They spoke, but he could not hear them. He could only hear the mysterious voice from long ago. I believe, I believe, I believe. Then suddenly he woke up. He looked around, his library startled. He could still hear the voice, but only the owls were there. For the second time, he felt the minds of Katherine and North reaching out to him. Their thoughts and his had become connected. He felt, no, he knew that they were in grave danger and that he must act instantly. He grabbed the box that held Nightlight's moonbeam and the broken bits of the diamond dagger. Then he waved his staff over the new stacks of books. He felt strong again, young again, like Ombrick in days of yore. Could he project himself to the earth's core? In an instant. And the books? Absolutely. His friends needed him. The peace he felt in his dream could come later. But that voice from the past, the voice that had saved him on that fateful day when he first learned the glory and terror of magic, it sounded so familiar now. Who or what was it? Chapter 30, in which all is linked by an ancient mind trick that has a most surprising origin. North was dazzled. Bunnymund was a madman or rabbit or whatever, a dervish, a devil, a juggernaut. There simply wasn't a way to describe the Pooka's electrifying deeds. He had taken his relic and fixed it to the end of his staff, then aimed it at the lead wall that blocked their way. If this ancient lead had never seen sunlight, starlight, or any light other than lava light before, it was seeing it now. The light that the relic contained blistered forth from 1,000 tiny holes that opened up from its shell. This light would not be blocked or consumed. It could peel back the dense lead as smoothly as sealing wax from parchment. But still, North felt wary. This was almost too easy. The fearlings kept retreating without putting up much of a fight. They were going deeper and deeper into the Earth's core, and the wavy, peculiar lead and lava landscape was hard to mark or remember. North prided himself on his stellar sense of direction, but he now felt uncertain about how to find his way back out, and his warrior's instincts were telling him he was being pulled into an ambush. It was just at that moment that it came a sort of ringing in his ears, the sensation blocking out the clatter of battle around him. He looked to Bunnymund. and he knew that the puka was experiencing the same sensation. The magic sword could feel it too. The mirror emerged again from its hilt, and North could see Katherine's face in it. Her lips did not move, but he could hear her voice. There is no time to tell you everything. We must call Ombrick now, she said. He needs us, and we need him. Pitch has made a trap for you. But how can we call Ombrick? North wondered. Then he remembered when they were back in Santa Claus and when he had felt their minds unite as one. He knew that he must concentrate to make their minds combine again. Despite the skirmish going on around him, he closed his eyes and all became quiet except for his and Katherine's voices. I believe, I believe, I believe. Then he heard Bunnymund's voice join theirs, and this surprised North. They had a new ally, a new friend. But then North saw Ombrick in the sword's mirror. He was lying in a field of grass. He looked sad, old, as if he were dying. It scared North. He could tell it did the same to Katherine and Bunnymund, so they shouted out to him, their minds as one. Believe, 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 you are needed. The mirror went bright. Then Ombrick was no longer visible. North heard Katherine say, be cautious, wait for Ombrick, wait for me. Then the mirror went dark again. North turned to Bunnymund, who was smiling. I haven't done the puka mind meld in centuries. I didn't know you and the girl knew how. Neither did we, North confessed. Even better, replied the puka, and off he hopped like some warrior rabbit buffalo. North had no choice but to follow. Oh gosh. Chapter 31, The Mad Scramble. North, Bunnymund, and the warrior eggs continued their push into the depths of Pitch's lair. Now mindful of the trap they were entering, Bunnymund left small groups of men, or rather eggs, to help mark their way out and to sound the alarm if an ambush was coming. But the fearlings continued to pull back now without fighting at all. Something is definitely up, Bunnymund said North. I'd say Pitch is making a tactical change in his plans, the puka agreed. Do we split our forces, wondered North. One of us goes forward to investigate while the other watches his back, suggested Bunnymund. You read my mind, North said jokingly. Yes, replied the puka, but only when I think it necessary. North wasn't sure if Bunnymund was kidding or not, but before he could ask, the hulking rabbit gave him a good-natured shove. Now get going, my friend. You wanted Pitch to yourself. North shot the rabbit a glance as he led half the eggs toward the heart of Pitch's hideout. Come hopping if you hear anything, he called over his shoulder. The puka decided to let North have the last word. He didn't mind the humans' rabbit jokes at his expense. It had been at least 700 years since anyone had made any sort of jest to him. He'd almost forgotten the peculiar pleasures of kidding and being kidded, and how humans used humor to help them not be afraid. And there was much to fear in this place. With spears, swords, and clubs at the ready, North led a tight formation of eggs cautiously forward. The fearling troops were continuing to back away, their clattering armors sending waves of uneasy echoes through the tunnel. It was dim. Only the blue glint of the lead lava flows provided any light. Then North heard the Nightmare King bellow, "Come forward." North's sword automatically tightened around his hand, but its glow stayed pale. North could tell it was doing all it could to avoid making him an easy target in this twilight. Then they came to a huge open chamber. Great swirling lead columns formed a sort of circular shape to the room. The columns widened at the top as they merged into what could be called the ceiling. Behind the lead columns, North could see only heavily armored fearlings, a vast army of gray menace that completely surrounded the chamber and seemed eager to attack. In the room's center, Pitch was standing triumphantly among every book from Ombrick's library. They were stacked haphazardly in tall piles on the uneven floor of the chamber. North could see the history of levitation while eating, mysteries of vanishing keys, and Ombrick's beloved books on Atlantis. What is the old man up to? North wondered. Pitch gazed greedily from book to book, then grabbed one and began to scan its contents. He smiled to himself, then looked up at North, staring at him with gleeful hate. North matched Pitch's stare, while from the corner of his eye he saw the children of Santoff Claus huddled in cages that hung from lead beams. Ombrick was nowhere in sight, so North knew to bide his time and wait till the wizard made his play. North realized Pitch was expecting him to say something, explain the arrival of the books, or demand the children be released. But North kept steady and quiet, as only the smartest warriors did. Let the villain make the first move. Why send a thief to do a puka's job? Pitch asked mockingly. North said not a word. He just moved in closer, the eggs at his side. He raised his sword as if to strike. Where'd you steal that? Pitch questioned, suddenly curious. It's a sword for a king, not a Cossack criminal. North stayed silent. The magic sword glowed. Pitch, however, did not reach for his own weapon, but instead held out one of Ombrick's books. At ease, brigand. I've got what I asked for. The books are here. Pitch turned to a fearling. Release the children, he ordered. The fearling unlocked the swaying cages, and the children jumped out. They tried to run to North, but the fearling unsheathed his sword and brought it down in front of them, blocking their way. Pointing to the sealed, solid lead cage, Tall William shouted, Katherine and Nightlight are in there. North inched closer, but still he said nothing. His sword glowed even brighter. No need to attack, Cossack, Pitch said soothingly. The books are here. A deal is a deal. We can part and fight another day, yes? North eyed him suspiciously. Could this work without a fight? But, Pitch continued, I must be sure these books are what they seem, and he began to read a spell. North knew that the incantation was directed at him. What would Pitch do? Turn him into a fungus, a slave, a fearling general? Prepared to charge, but the sword held him back. He pushed against it, but it would not budge. Then he remembered what Yalu, the Yeti, had told him. Perhaps the weapon is fighting for you. The sword held him back. The sword must know something. So Pitch, on the other hand, was growing angry. Something was evidently not going as he wished. Pitch repeated the spell from the book slowly, carefully, as if testing each syllable. Then North understood the spell was useless. The books were sabotaged. Pitch tried another spell and another. He snatched up the book of enslavement spells and read the words he knew by heart. They're all fake, he bellowed. Fake! North, ready to strike. Behind him, he could hear the charge of Bunnymund and his troops. Pitch threw the book down and unsheathed his sword. The room exploded into chaos. The fearlings rushed north. The ear-splitting clash of two armies bent on destroying each other filled the chamber. Then the Pukan war cry sounded out above the din. Bunnymund had arrived, his relic staff sending beams of light crisscrossing the room, engulfing the fearlings. The room was furious with spears, swords, clubs, arrows, and armor. North was amazed. The warrior eggs were incredibly agile fighters. They could roll, leap, and charge with lightning speed, and their armor was most difficult to penetrate. Their weapons were injected with the ancient light of the egg relic and more than held their own against the fearlings. North kept his own sights on Pitch, who was moving toward the children. North's sword glowed red. It was time to strike. They charged through the dense clusters of fearlings and warrior eggs, easily felling every enemy that blocked his way. Pitch was opening his cape. It rippled out and began to surround the children. North ran up the huge stack of books in front of them like it was a staircase, then leaped from the top, his sword at the ready, sailing over Pitch. Pitch's cape was curling around the children like a pair of massive claws, but before he could close it, North landed between them. Villain and thief were face to face, swords drawn. North said to his sword, "Do what needs doing." With two deft swings, he sliced away the cape on either side of Pitch. The children were free, but in that one moment of victory, North's guard was down and Pitch did his worst. North staggered backward, gasping. The handle of Pitch's saber protruded from his side. The tip jutted out from the back of his coat. He'd been run through. The children screamed. Pitch grinned. He pulled his sword back out, but North would not go down yet. He gripped his magic sword and it responded. It glowed with such brightness. It was then that miracles occurred. Nightlight's cage exploded open and light poured from it. The entire chamber was awash with light. The armor-covered fearlings were almost blinded. Pitch pulled the cowl of his hood forward to block his face from the glare. North charged again. Despite his wounds, despite the wrenching pain, he could feel an amazing power surge from the magic sword into him. It was almost as if the sword could remember Pitch and was eager to finish him. With indescribable fury, North hacked and lunged at the nightmare king. But Pitch had grown stronger since last they'd met, and even with the power of the magic sword, North was unable to best him. His wound was hampering him. He felt himself weakening. Then he saw the genie discarded in the corner. Without Pitch inside it, perhaps it would still heed his command. "Genie," North shouted, "attack him." The genie immediately stiffened and then ran toward North. It picked up two swords that were dropped in the battle. Was it coming to help or hinder? The genie attacked Pitch. Now we've got a chance, North thought with relief. When he next looked up, he was stunned to see Ombric there as well, swinging at Pitch with his staff and landing more blows than North would ever have expected from the old wizard. Then Bunnymund literally came flying into the room, his ears twirling with such speed that they held him aloft like a helicopter. With the relic at the end of his lance, he charged Pitch like a jousting knight. But Pitch was their match. He shouted out to the fearlings, and they began to merge into him. He grew bigger and stronger, their armor adding layer after layer atop his. Now Pitch was truly a monster in size as well as spirit. The children huddled into a corner. They could see what was happening. Even without Ombric's books of spells, Pitch seemed unbeatable. Fear crept into their hearts. Then, from the lead cage, there shot another bolt of light, and a shimmering, perfect laugh pierced the noise of the battle like an arrow. Nightlight's laugh. There's Bunnymund in his battle. Nightlight flew straight toward Pitch with Katherine. Right. Nightlight flew straight toward Pitch with Katherine riding on his back. His staff was outstretched, the diamond dagger repaired and aimed at Pitch's heart. North caught a glimpse of them as they streaked towards Pitch. Outstanding, he thought the boy will do him in, but Nightlight pulled up short, hovering just within reach of Pitch's sword. What is he doing? North thought, pausing in mid-swing. His heart, boy, he shouted. Strike him in the heart. Still, Nightlight held back. Pitch, however, did not. He sliced savagely at Nightlight, but the spectral boy parried his blow, and his diamond dagger shattered Pitch's sword. Now North and the others could move in for the kill, but before they could strike, Katherine raised up her hand and held something out toward Pitch. Not a weapon. No, it was something she wanted him to see. What is she holding? North strained to look. The locket of the picture of Pitch's daughter. Locket. Katherine has the locket picture of Pitch's daughter. Time seemed to stand still. Pitch stared at the locket, his face twisted and monstrous. His gaze did not waver from the picture. Then his face began to change, the anger and fury fading, replaced by a look that was mournful, anguished, and unbearably sad. North and the others held steady, hardly believing what they were seeing. The king of the nightmares was no longer horrifying, but horrified. The king of the monsters was no longer horrifying, but horrified. He reached out with his damaged hand, the one he had used to try to change Nightlight into a fearling, the hand that now looked human. He tugged the locket away from Katherine, and for an instant she felt his hand against hers. His touch was not of a creature of fear. It was the touch of a father who had lost his child. Pitch let out a long and haunted scream that came from the depths of whatever sort of a soul he still had. He looked at the picture for one more moment, then faded, vanishing completely away. The fearling army disappeared with him, and the battle was over. Chapter 32. North is fallen. There was a sudden and strange calm in the chamber. There they were, together at last, the heroes of the battle at the Earth's core. Such an amazing and unlikely group. A spectral boy, a girl, a Cossack, an ancient wizard, a metal genie, a huge rabbit man, and an army of warrior eggs. The children ran to the comfort of their friends' protectors, but North winced as the littlest William rushed into his arms. He grabbed at his wound, then dropped his sword and fell to one knee. Ombrick and Katherine hurried to his side. "How bad is it, lad?" asked Ombrick, bending close. North could not answer. As they laid him down, his face grew paler and even more drained of color. His sword lay next to him. It seemed to dim and darken. Katherine took his hand. It felt cold. North looked up at her as she began to cry. Chapter 33. The bookworm turns. It was a beautiful afternoon in the enchanted woods that surrounded Santa Claus. The children of the village were playing their favorite new game called Battle at the Earth's Core. The massive trees that edged the small open grove had bent their branches down in ways that looked like the lead columns of Pitch's lair. William, the almost youngest, was pretending to be Ombrick. Tall William was Bunnymund. Fog was the genie, and Petter was Nightlight. The bear was Pitch, which worked very well as he was so large and very good at tussling with the children with just enough wildness that it was really fun. Plus, he was very difficult to hurt by accident. A group of squirrels pretended to be the children, dressed up in tiny clothes that matched what they had been wearing during the battle. The birds of the forest were the fearlings, and a number of actual warrior eggs, a gift from Bunnymund, played themselves. William, the absolute youngest, always wanted to be North. He loved North so much, and it was he who had last hugged North before North fell. Petter yelled for Katherine to join them to play her own character, but she did not answer. She rarely joined in this game. She'd lived it all, after all. so she didn't need to play it. Petter's sister, Sasha, gladly took her place. Katherine was up in the topmost branches of Big Root. She had made a small ramshackle treehouse in the crook at the highest point. She went to it often now. She could be alone there to think and to remember. She spent her time making stories out of what she had seen. Sometimes she even wrote short little rhymes of their adventures. There was an egg that had fallen from a wall of Pitch's chamber during the battle. She was sure he would break, but his armor had protected him. If only the same could have been said for North. He had fallen, but his armor, she was sure that this egg that fell off the wall would break, but his armor had protected him. If only the same could have been said for North. He had fallen, and no one had thought he could be made whole again. Today, she was combining those two stories into a rhyme, drawing pictures of a great egg that had shattered and could be put back together again. Humpty Dumpty, what do you think? She would sometimes make stories that were different from what had happened, but were about how she felt or what she wished had been. This was a new way of thinking for her, and she loved it, needed to do it. These stories had become a mysterious new force in her, a way of healing and understanding the wonders and sorrows of her wild new life. She was never actually alone in the treehouse. Kailash would fly up there and nap quietly as Katherine wrote, her long neck wrapped around the girl as she leaned against the soft feathered body. And there was one more companion with her, Mr. Qwerty, or at least what he had become. When Nightlight had told Mr. Qwerty to eat the library to save it from Pitch, yes, it had been Nightlight's idea. Something remarkable had happened. The spells and magic contained in 1,000 pages had transformed the glowworm. In his cocoon, he had changed, but was not into a butterfly. He had become instead something that the world had never seen before. He had wings, many of them, but they were made of paper. He had become a sort of living book. His pages were all blank. It was on these pages that Katherine wrote her stories. Katherine could hear her friends playing in the woods. They were making the story, too, of that great and terrible battle. It always changed as they acted it out. Sometimes whoever played Bunnymund would come to later, or the bear would run off too soon. Bunnymund would come too later, or the bear would run off too soon. The squirrels would decide that they wanted to join in the battle and escape from the cages too early, but one part always stayed the same: when North fell. Somehow it seemed important to do that part exactly as it had happened. As Katherine sat in her treehouse, she heard her friends readying for their game's final battle. She stopped her writing to listen. Down in the forest, William, the absolute youngest, had fallen to the ground, the stick that was his pretend sword lying at his side. Sasha, Bog, Petter, and the others stood over him as he seemed to die. Then he reached for his magic sword. Suddenly, a voice came booming from the trees at the edge of the clearing. No, 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 yelled Nicholas St. North. He came striding toward, and that's not how it happened. Bunnymund gave me that magic chocolate first. North came up to them looking very hale and hearty. He carried with him a large sack thrown over his shoulder. The magic chocolate saved me. I grabbed the sword and it began to glow again, he reminded them. But our stick can't glow for real, explained the youngest William. Well, this one can, replied North cheerfully as he dumped the sack upside down. Toy swords and staffs and relics and costumes spilled out on the ground before them. I made them this morning. Well, the genie helped a bit. The children were delighted with their gifts. They grabbed their different costumes and weaponry and prepared to continue their game. Katherine flew down on Kailash. She wanted to watch how her friends would act out the rest of the events now that they had props. Bunnymund came popping up out of the ground nearby, Ombrick with him. The two had become close collaborators since the battle. Once Ombrick had discovered that it was Bunnymund who had saved him that long ago day when he had tried his first magic. They traded spells and histories of this and that. He felt a strong kinship with the rabbit man, the only creature alive who was older and wiser than himself. Being with this marvelous creature made Ombrick feel younger, almost like a student again. The two of them stopped a moment and watched the children's game unfold. So how exactly does the chocolate transform you, Bunnymund? Ombrick asked his new friend. My dear fellow, the rabbit replied, I'm not entirely sure. Some mysteries need no solution. Does it help to understand why rainbows happen? I think it does, replied Ombrick. The rabbit almost laughed. You humans! And from the trees above, a brave and gentle spirit watched them all. Nightlight, the one who said the least but perhaps knew the most, thought only of the comfort he felt. He was among true friends. The moonbeam, back inside the diamond dagger, was happy as well. The dagger was bigger now. It contained the tears that Nightlight had taken from the children when they'd been kidnapped. He'd used them to bind the broken dagger back together again. Nightlight had always known that taking the sorrows of those you love makes you stronger in the end. Taking the sorrows of those you love makes you stronger in the end. Remembering this now made him glow a bit brighter. Katherine could sense his gaze. She turned and looked up. She could not see him. He was hiding, but she knew he was there. The power of friendship was magical indeed. The happiness Nightlight felt spread to all of them. They had done what good friends should do. They had done what good friends should do. They had all saved one another. They had all saved one another. Whatever trials or troubles might come, from now on, their bond would be unbreakable. They were of one mind and heart, and that heart would beat forever, past time and tide and stories yet told.